It's a criminal act.
A spit in the face.
It is a nuclear war.
You create a kind of cartel.
Greed. That's the only word.
Do you hope there wouldn't be a Super League?
Didn't change.
Some of the executives are getting cold feet.
I want to apologise.
From Joel Glazer, we are sorry.
This has been a farce.
Supporters will not forgive.
This is dead in the water.
That is the end of it.
Gentlemen, you made a huge mistake.
Where now for the beautiful game at the end of a week that has threatened to rip football apart. Good evening. Over the next 2.5 hours, we'll bring you the inside story of how the Super League was created and how it collapsed 48 hours later. Mostly, though, we're going to look ahead to what will happen next to the big 6 clubs that threatened to break away and to those they tried to leave behind. In a moment, Brian Swanson and Carl Weissoliker will tell us what punishments we can expect and the longer-term implications for the Premier League. We'll also bring you a brand new interview with Pep Guardiola as we ask him what changes he thinks are needed. We'll speak to Nemanja Matic, who yesterday addressed angry fans protesting at the Manchester United training ground. And we'll be live to Spain, Germany and Italy for the latest across Europe after the news that Barcelona and Real Madrid still want to go ahead with a Super League. Also on our guest list, Gary Neville, and live in the studio, John Barnes. But we're going to start with some breaking news. Carve, you've come in brandishing a piece of paper. What's on it?
Yes, basically we've got the situation now where we have a split between the 6 clubs who tried to join this Super League and the 14 other clubs in the Premier League. And what we're learning this evening is that the 14 other Premier League clubs now want the chairman and chief executives of the 6 clubs who tried to join the Super League to be punished and removed from their positions. Now, we've heard a lot about these 6 clubs, their executives telephoning the other 14 clubs to apologise. That is not enough. According to consensus of feeling amongst the 14 now, heads must roll. People have to pay a price for what they did. We've been speaking to 3 chief executives at these 14 clubs. I'll give you a flavour of what they have been telling us this afternoon. One of them said, we had been told repeatedly that they weren't setting up a Super League. So after what's happened this week, we simply can't deal with these people again. The owners of these 6 clubs need to find new people to represent them at the Premier League meetings. They have to be replaced. We can't deal with them again. Some of these people have more faces than the town clock. This is what one of the chief executives told us. Another one said, if this plan had gone through, it would have ruined the other 14 clubs. We would have been destroyed. We have absolutely no problem with the fans, players, managers and staff of those 6 clubs, but we have big problems with their owners and CEOs. And a third one told us, ideally, we want the owners to sell up, but we know that's not going to happen. What they can do, though, is replace these people and bring in some fresh faces. What they've done goes against everything we stand for. If these people ever come to one of our meetings again, we will stonewall them. We will blank them. So that is what those 14 clubs are thinking at the moment.
It's very strong stuff.
Saying sorry, not enough. They want punishments. They want some of these people to be removed from the Premier League. They are not people they can do business with ever again.
It kind of reflects the depth of feeling, Brian, doesn't it, throughout the football and beyond?
I think the authorities are attempting to establish what on earth has just happened in the game over the last couple of days. Who was accountable? Who made the final decision? When and why? The FA Chief Executive Mark Bullingham spoke briefly on a media conference call earlier today, and he said to me that we are exploring all options to prevent it ever happening again, including changes to our rule book. Nothing is off the table. Now, as we have been hearing, senior figures in the 14 clubs directly affected all agree that something needs to be done. Some are convinced that those 6 clubs have already broken at least one Premier League rule. We're getting into the issue now of punishment. Nobody appears to be talking about points deductions, for instance, and the reason for that is because it's widely accepted it would impact on the wrong people. It would hurt the managers, it would hurt the players, it would hurt the fans, and they're not the people responsible for this. Richard Masters, remember, the Premier League chief executive, found out about this plan before it was announced on Sunday evening. He urgently contacted the clubs. I've seen the 450-word email that he sent out to all 20 of them, in which he said their rule wouldn't allow for it to take place in any scenario. The 6 clubs ignored him, ignored the advice of Richard Masters, ignored the government. Masters was very clear in that email saying that he expected complete condemnation if this went ahead from all parts of the game. They ignored him. So the feeling within the Premier League, within the Football Association and within the wider footballing community is that something needs to be done towards the decision makers of the 6 clubs.
We all expect people to say something must be done. We all expect big threats, if you want to call it that. We've got to get rid of the owners and chief executives, not the owners, the chief executives and the chairman of the big 6. But we hear this stuff on these occasions. Is it going to happen?
Look, I think there's been a big change. This has been a watershed week in the history of European football. For so long now, we have had these 6 clubs flexing their muscles. Every time it comes to any decision at the Premier League, there's 6 clubs saying, look, this is what we want. We have to have this. If we don't get our own way, in the background, there's always been the threat that they would go away and set up a European Super League. That threat has always been there. Now, they played their hand on Sunday. It went disastrously wrong. That threat has now been removed for the time being. So the other 14 clubs are thinking this is an opportunity for us to make sure that in the future, everybody in the Premier League, 20 clubs, gets an equal say. We're not going to put up with these people talking down to us anymore. We're not going to put up with these people turning up to the meetings and laying down the law. That is not the way it's going to be in the future. For a start, we're not going to deal with these people at all. So bring in some new people, and the new people who come in have to show a lot more humility and a lot more respect to English football and to the other 14 clubs in the Premier League.
OK, important weeks ahead, more from Carve and from Brian throughout the next 2.5 hours. But before we came on air, I spoke to Pep Guardiola about how he's feeling at the end of a tumultuous week and what he thinks might happen next. What lessons would you like the football family, if you like, to draw from this week?
I spoke. I think the chapter is closed. So the boards, the officials, the Premier Leagues, the UEFA, the clubs, we will learn of that and we will follow what they do.
Has it been a good week for football or a bad week for football?
We won against Aston Villa. It was a good week.
But more generally, is football a happier place now than it was a week ago or not?
It's what everyone's wanted. This is the important thing. And the football is going to change in the next years, in the future, because I said many times before, the Champions League, it just was being played for the champion. And after a few years, it was the 4 teams there. And maybe it's going to change. Maybe the Champions League next season is going to change with more games, because we don't play much games and we're going to play more games. So we are going to do it, and the important is, and everybody's agree, and everybody's commitment for the changes, that for the better football, for the better quality in the next years, and as much funds we can recruit, a good recruitment for the way we play it. It will be better for our healthy, will be better for the football, world football. This is only I'm concerned. Equality for everyone, and everyone is going to play any competitions on the pitch, and everyone has the quality to win that game. This is the more important thing.
And we'll hear more from Pep Guardiola in that interview in the next couple of hours, when we're also going to focus on all of the so-called big 6 clubs in England that threatened to break away. Start at Manchester United. These were the scenes at their training ground at Carrington yesterday, as fans demanded answers about their club's involvement. Nemanja Matic and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer went out to speak to them and Matic has been telling us about what happened.
Yeah, we saw the fans here in our training ground, and I think that was very nice from our manager to decide to go out and speak to them. And he showed with that gesture, he showed that us as a club, we respect our supporters, we respect their opinions. So we just went outside to speak to them. And I think that was a positive thing. Yeah, they shared their opinions with us. Of course, we understand them. And what I can say behind all the players, that we are really focused on our job, to train well, to play well. As you know, on Sunday we have a big game. So everyone is thinking only about that. So what's happened before, that's behind us. So we are focused only what's going to happen in the future.
That's just part of an interview that Nemanja Matic did today with Soccer Saturday's Bianca Westwood. And you can hear the whole interview by tuning in to Soccer Saturday tomorrow afternoon. Right now, we'll go live to Manchester and James Cooper for more on United. James, good evening. You've been speaking to Ole Gunnar Solskjaer today. What does he make of the fans' reaction and indeed the apology from his club?
Yeah, I think Manchester United have been surprised by the weight of feeling against them, against the owners and against the idea of a European Super League. And I think that was symptomatic by what happened yesterday morning with this group of around 20 Manchester United fans making their way down Carrington Lane past security and into the Aon training complex. And I think that'll have Manchester United looking at their kind of security precautions and the measures they have at the training ground, bearing in mind that the group, fairly good-natured but also determined as well, got to the reception area and also got to the first team training area. And I think all credit, as Nemanja Matic says, goes to Ole Gunnar Solskjaer for kind of diffusing the situation a little bit by coming out. He came out with Matic and also with Darren Fletcher and Michael Carrick. I think he knows his value to the fans, bearing in mind his heritage as a Manchester United player, but also their backing as a Manchester United manager through some pretty rough waters over recent times, but some better times of late. And here's what he had to say about those fans coming to Carrington yesterday morning.
First of all, I'm very happy that the fans have voiced their opinion and that we've listened to them. And in a strange sort of way, it's brought the football pyramid or community together, and I think that's important. I'm a supporter myself, and there'll be a day that I'll come back and watch Man United, and I want to watch a Man United team even with a fear of failure. You know, that's one of what I thought about it. I didn't like the concept anyway, because it has to be on sporting merit. I want to earn the right to play in Europe. That fear of failure, that you can't just be giving it on because your name is such and such. You have to earn the right to be there, and then to get the best possible performance, stepping out of your comfort zone, being afraid of failure, that spurs you on, living on the edge a little bit. And that wasn't part of this. And for me, I'm very happy that all the clubs that have admitted their mistake, that this was a bad idea. Just when we were talking about getting fans back into the stadium, we get this. We have a banner at Old Trafford, and now football is nothing without the fans. Man United is the biggest club in the world, and of course we want to be part of European football, but we want to do that by, like my players did last season. They were afraid of not making it to the Champions League. I back my team to be there in the top in Europe, but I still think that fear of failure is helping us do that, and that's being a sporting competitor as I am, and my nature is not being handed things. We can't be handed a place. That's my opinion.
James, there's also been renewed pressure today on the Glazers from the Red Knights. Remind us who they are and what do they want?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a significant week with significant things happening. We haven't heard from the Glazers at length and since their apology the other day, since 2005 when they took over the club. Likewise, we've not heard from the Red Knights since 2010 when they were trying to take hold of the club and they failed in that attempt. But two of them, Lord O'Neill and Sir Paul Marshall, both city financiers, have written to the Glazer family asking them to change the share structure of the club and asking them to lower their control of the club round about 75% they own at the moment. They'd like to see that below 50%. I think those ideas of fan control and greater diversity in the shareholding of Manchester United will chime in very nicely with what fans want at the moment. But I think equally what we've seen over the past few days is that these owners want to monetize their investment in these football clubs. That's the bottom line here, and maybe getting rid of shares right now isn't the way they want to go and do about that. But I think it is significant that these two guys have come on board again, said the things they want to say, and maybe just seized upon the feeling of the fans, because, as I say, that was symbolised by what happened at the training ground yesterday. Manchester United fans, like many fans across the country, aren't happy with how things stand right now.
James Cooper, live from Manchester. Thank you. Carve, Ed Woodward, the chief exec, has said he's going at the end of the year. Will he last that long?
Very good question. Look, we've seen these stories emerging over the past 24 hours. We reported them as well, that he was resigning and he was unhappy about the fact that Manchester United had signed up to join this breakaway league. And now, that is one side of the story. The other side of the story, coming from the other 14 clubs in the Premier League, are that they are quite astonished at those stories, because as far as they were concerned, Ed Woodward was involved in trying to set up a European Super League from day one. And one chief executive said to me, stories saying Ed Woodward resigned because he was against the European Super League are laughable. He was involved from day one. Of course, we're getting a different side of the story from Manchester United and Ed Woodward's camp, saying that once he found out that United had signed up for it, he thought, I can't be part of this, I'm going to resign at the end of the year. Other people in the game thinking, hey, we thought Mr. Woodward was involved all along and he was driving these proposals, of course, on behalf of the owners of Manchester United, the Glazers.
There's a bit of he said, she said, isn't there, about that? Brian, how did it all go wrong so quickly? Because we went from it was full steam ahead on Sunday night to it's all over by the end of Monday night.
I suspect Ed Woodward's wondering what on earth has just happened as well. And speaking to several figures in the game this week, they're all agreed, in particular, that the US owners would try it again tomorrow if they thought they could succeed. Plenty of soul-searching going on in the game at the moment, but why I think it did fall down so quickly is those clubs massively underestimated the government intervention on this. The Football Association will have reached out to senior figures in government, Richard Masters too at the Premier League, and Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, said to them, how can I help? What can I do to help prevent this? What legislation, what laws can I introduce to help prevent any form of club breaking away from the current structure that's in place? Remember, we are in a post-Brexit world now, and what Boris Johnson and the government says and decides has huge ramifications for this country outside of the European Union. And I think as soon as the clubs found out that the government intervention was going to be swift, it was going to be decisive, there was not going to be a hands-off approach here, they felt that in the end it was inevitable that this would collapse barely 48 hours after it had been announced a massive fanfare.
Brian, thank you for now. Much more from Brian and Carve to come. And when we come back in a couple of minutes, we're going to hear from Jurgen Klopp on calls for a change of ownership at Liverpool. Here's what he's had to say today.
If they would have spoken to me before, I would have told them, no, that's not a good idea. Would have had changed something. I don't know. I know our owners, they are not perfect. Like I'm not perfect, like you are not perfect, but they are not bad people.
And live with us on the comfiest seat in the studio, a Liverpool legend. Views from John Barnes on where football goes from here next.
We're all in to kick it out.
Welcome back to a special programme on Sky Sports, Football's Civil War. No doubt what the majority of Liverpool fans made of their club's involvement in the failed Super League venture. Let's get some views from John Barnes, Liverpool legend. John, you're very welcome. What was your reaction to what your former club did? Sadness? Surprise?
Well, first of all, I remember when it came out, and I didn't think it would happen. I didn't think it was a good idea. I'm watching the headline Football Civil War. I like a bit of history. Civil wars don't normally last 2 days. The opposition put up more of a fight. So this was a damn squib. This was not a civil war. So I never ever thought it would happen. Obviously, when big businessmen got involved in football, they were told that they have to understand the nature of football and football fans. I think it's the other way around. I think football fans have to understand the nature of big business. And this is what happens in business. It's unfortunate. So yes, it is disappointing. But what is going to be the outcome? A lot of people are now posturing and threatening. But if you really think about it, when people talk about, for example, people are saying, kick them out. I don't know whether the sponsors would be interested in a Premier League without Liverpool, Arsenal, Chelsea, Manchester United.
I don't think anyone's saying kick them out.
I've heard that.
They're saying kick the owners out, but not the...
No. We've heard about banning the teams if they went ahead and did it. Or you've heard... if they actually did it, banning the players from playing for England. And I don't think, and the moral guardians of the world, FIFA, we know what they're like. But when they're talking about banning Mbappe and Messi and players like this, I don't think the sponsor would be too interested. Nothing much will change. And interestingly, today, you hear the rumblings, and you're talking about this possibly continuing, as much as we think it's over. I've heard Jurgen Klopp, I've heard Pep Guardiola not happy with the Champions League in terms of playing too many matches and not being happy with that. So what's going to happen when all of a sudden too many matches in the Premier League, in the Champions League, players are going to get injured? What will the fans think about the Champions League in that format in relation to their club? So I think this has still got a long way to go. So
what do you see as being the next steps, and who's going to make them?
Well, the status quo is now back. Nothing will happen. You will continue. But that's why I'm saying, just listening to a lot of the noises talking about being unhappy with the format of the new Champions League, because this really was an attempt to take over from the Champions League. The Premier League may be affected in terms of being able to finish fourth and qualify for it, but it really was a direct attack on the Champions League, not so much the Premier League.
OK, let's have a word from John W. Henry, who's the only Premier League owner to have apologised on camera so far. We'll hear from Jurgen Klopp on what he made of it in just a second. First, a quick reminder of what Henry said earlier this week.
I want to apologise to all the fan supporters of Liverpool Football Club for the disruption I caused over the past 48 hours. Goes without saying, but should be said, that the project put forward was never going to stand without the support of the fans. No one ever thought differently in England. Over these 48 hours, you were very clear that it would not stand. We heard you.
Let's go live to Vinny O'Connor at Anfield. Some Liverpool fans, Vinny, calling for a change of ownership. How does Klopp feel about the board now?
Well, again, we had that strange situation today where Jurgen Klopp was having to field questions about the actions of the club's owners. The club's owners, of course, are still to respond to our own interview requests, but the fans' attitude remains clear. At the Kop end, banners are still flying, making it clear their discontent at the direction FSG tried to take the club in. One more recent banner saying, "Nice one for the apology, but we won't forget." The Liverpool manager, on the other hand, though, was satisfied that the video apology from John W. Henry was personal enough. And today, in some ways, I suppose, it saw him trying to pull two factions back together, the owners and the fans. Now, Klopp wasn't going to tell the fans exactly what they should think. After all, he does agree that the owners made a bad decision, that they aren't perfect, as he himself isn't perfect. But he maintains, as you heard earlier today as well, that they are good people who he wants to continue working with.
I will have time to speak to them, and that probably will tell me what they thought, what the thoughts will be behind. But is that really important now? So it's what he said before. If they would have spoken to me before, I would have told them, no, that's not a good idea. Would have had changed something? I don't know. So again, a manager is not. I decide a lot of things, but never did before these kind of things. None of us is doing it. It's great that it didn't happen. Absolutely great. It would have been really really bad. But now it didn't happen, and now I have a job to do. Nothing happened, and nothing will happen in the near future with the teams. Now they will not come around the corner next week again and try to do something. For sure not. They all learned their lesson. I'm pretty sure. I know our owners. They are not perfect. Like I'm not perfect. Like you are not perfect. But they are not bad people. So, and they made a not so good decision. Let me say a bad decision. That's true. But let's carry on. I know there were some moments when they might not have made the right decisions, this time for sure. And that doesn't change for me too much, because I prefer dealing with the problems or the people I know than just changing, because then you might have the same problems early enough again.
So, Klopp happy with his relationship with the board, Vinny, but he's taken aim at the new Champions League format today.
Yeah, he did that in much the same way as Pep Guardiola did today as well. I suppose you can understand the frustrations of managers as well, both for themselves and on behalf of their players as well, because if it's not their owners of the big six making decisions and not consulting those it impacts most, like the managers and the players, then it's UEFA doing exactly the same thing. The new UEFA Champions League format basically proposes more games in what Klopp believes is already a more than congested fixture schedule. And just like the Super League proposal, in Klopp's view, it all comes back to money.
Yes, the Super League is off the table. Good, very good. But the new Champions League is now not that you think, oh, great, what's that? Let's just do that. They showed it to me. They called me and they gave 1 hour to UEFA, and then they showed it to me, the whole idea, and I said I don't like it because there are 10 games instead of 6. I have no idea where we shall put them in. The only people who will never get asked are the coaches, the players, and the supporters, yes. But we are already on the edge. And believe me, when all the coaches think the same, so if they all think the same, there must be something in that it could be a little bit too much. Nobody listened to the players and the managers. And if we mention it, it's always, the argument is always, yeah, but you get that well paid. Yeah, rotate your squad and all these kind of things. The football structure in this moment is not prepared for more games. We spoke about that. I spoke about that. Nobody really listened. It sounds always that I'm moaning. It's just a situation. And now one thing happened where everybody was obviously involved and everybody was on the same page. That should not happen. All the other things still happen. That's much worse. They still happen. Nobody cuts off games to just continue. More games, more games. In this structure in the moment, it's not possible. You cannot have 20 teams in the league, 2 cup competitions, playing 10 international games before Christmas. These things are not possible. But how is that? We don't get asked. We just have to deliver.
Amidst the backdrop of all this, Jurgen Klopp is focusing on what he believes will be 6 cup finals between now and the end of the season to qualify for next season's Champions League, a competition that will remain in the same format at least until 2024.
Vinny O'Connor live from Anfield. Thank you. Brian.
John, just wanted to share with you what a couple of people in the game were saying to me in the last couple of days, and they're broadly in agreement. They're all saying this was always coming. The maximum risk was when the Champions League was being renegotiated. They said football-like society is riven with inequality, saying capitalism is great at creating wealth and not much good at distributing it. Once billionaires own football clubs, you are at the mercy of their values. Now, particular sources that I'm speaking to saying the US owners in particular are the problem, as they want to replicate the closed-shop US franchise model to underpin the value of their investments. And this is the problem, isn't it? It's very, very difficult to unpick, because on the one hand, everyone gets very excited when owners come in. Yeah. Money is distributed, it's made available to managers to buy exciting players to help promote the brand. But on the other hand, we have to stay true to their values, and that's the problem.
But that only affects positively a certain group of people if you happen to be in the Premier League. When they talk about grassroots football, how much does that filter down? It doesn't. And when we're talking about changing the owners, if we're going to change the owners of the top 6, they'll be sold to richer people than them with more power, who are not going to be dictated to by the fans. So you have to be careful what you wish for. FSG has been very supportive of Jurgen. That's why we won the Champions League. That's why we bought Alisson. And under those circumstances, when you get people like that, businessmen who look at it from a business point of view, regardless of whether they're from America or anywhere else, this is what you're going to get. You're going to get people focusing on the business rather than the football.
But if you were buying one of the top 6 clubs now, or any of the Premier League clubs, you surely do it in the knowledge of what's happened this week and the force of reaction that the ESL met with. Does it make a difference?
Yes, but then when all of a sudden you're looking at it from a financial point of view on how to make money, and you hear the clubs already talking about they want to play less games, I'm sure they want more money for less games as well. It's not saying we'll take less money. And how are you going to get more money for less games? Unless you create a more elite organisation, which is what the Premier League did in '92, which is what the Champions League did when it was the European Cup. But of course, UEFA have to not just be concerned with the elite, UEFA have to be concerned with everyone. That's why they're expanding it to allow teams from some of the other European countries. But of course, a lot of the elite teams are now not happy with it, and we're hearing whispers about that. So this has got a long way to run.
The Premier League will say, sorry Nick, the Premier League will say that it provides more of its revenues across the pyramid than any other league in Europe. But what it does, also highlight in terms of the complicated measures that are needed to unpick. We talk about a breakaway as if it's straightforward.
Yeah.
I think the statement on Sunday night said it was simple. This was never simple.
Yeah, of course it's not
the umbrella.
But I think that what they've hung there, the tagline it is about the distribution of wealth. And of course, I've been on Twitter talking to a few people, and they've mentioned the fact that I was the first £10,000 a week player, so why should I be talking about controlling salaries? However, if you look at players who played in this, let's call it old money, 4th division, who may have earned on average £10,000 a week, and then of course in the Premier League, the 1st division, the top earners, which I was one at that particular time, may have earned £100,000 a year, for example. In the lower divisions, they're still earning £10,000 a week, but the top earners are earning £3 million a year on average. So therefore, the distribution of wealth has not been proper. So therefore, we like when all of a sudden another elite group wants to break away and say it's for the good of football and the lower leagues, and that's a bit disingenuous. So, as I said, it's not as simple as just trying to be fair for football.
There's been a lot of talk about a salary cap this week. Do you think there's any way a salary cap would ever be introduced into English football?
I don't know if it would be introduced, but it would be a fantastic idea. The salary cap doesn't impinge on the top earners earning £300,000 a week, the Raheem Sterlings and these people. But what happens is we've seen players coming in, not only into this country, but coming from club to club, earning £80,000 to £100,000 a week, and there are lots of them. And that's the problem, why owners feel that they can't manage their finances, not because of the top earners, but because of so many players. Clubs have got 40 players on the list, 50 players, 20 of them out on loan. Some of them are earning £20,000 a week not playing. This is the problem when owners come in, because they see the sponsorship money coming in. It's a lot of money, but they get when they actually see how much the salaries they have to pay, as well as clubs having 800 employees, for example, Liverpool in the commercial department, and they have to pay them as well. So the whole idea of football clubs just making lots of money and the owners making lots of profit, that's not true.
You've got a few hats. Can I get you to put your Celtic hat on? There's been a lot of chat in Scotland this week about the British Super League off the back of this. Does what's happened this week make the involvement of Celtic and Rangers playing with the English clubs in a league more likely or less likely?
Well, I don't see how we could do that, because if we're talking about being fair and talking about, everything if we take Celtic and Rangers out of Scotland, which will make the Premier League stronger because we've got 2 great teams, how is that going to affect the rest of the Scottish League and grassroots football in Scotland? So we can't have it both ways. As much as that would help the Premier League, it would help the Premier League. How is that going to help Scottish football generally? So, we have to be very careful when we want to criticise people for trying to do something, and we want to do the same.
Would it ever happen?
I can't see it happening, no. Because, of course, when you talk about passing laws, we're trying to take 6 teams, which is wrong, out of the Premier League. And we have big enough clubs to maybe survive that. We don't know, because the 6 teams are the Premier League, really, in terms of the sponsors all over the world. You take Celtic and Rangers out of Scottish football, Scottish football is dead.
John, great to see you. Thank you. Next, we're going to go to another of the clubs who tried and failed to launch that Super League, and we get some very interesting views today from Thomas Tuchel.
I'm in.
I'm in.
We're all in to kick it out.
Partnering to end racism in sport.
We want Crocky out. Say we want Crocky out. We want Crocky out. Say we want Crocky out. We want Crocky out. Say we want Crocky out.
Those scenes from just a few minutes ago at Arsenal tonight. The message was clear. We want Kroenke out. Stan Kroenke, the Arsenal mostly absentee owner. This is Vinay Venkatesan, the chief executive, arriving a short time ago for the game against Everton tonight that you can see live on Sky Sports, and we will be live with our reporter at the ground and also with Alan Smith for his views in the next 20 minutes or so here on Football's Civil War. We're going to talk Chelsea as well with some interesting quotes from Thomas Tuchel to Sky Sports today about how he felt in taking charge of the team against Brighton on Tuesday. Let me just tell you some of what he's had to say. I was a bit annoyed, he said. I was a bit angry. I was impatient. I was absolutely not focused like I normally am on match days. It was a strange mix and I couldn't really get rid of it during the match. And after the match, my medicine was to turn things off. Well, Tuchel's also been holding his weekly news conference today. Sky's Gail Davis was there. She joined us live from Stamford Bridge. How was his mood today, Gail?
I'm not sure it's improved too much, has it, Nick? We'll hear in a moment. But let me just remind you about the scenes here on Tuesday evening. Pretty extraordinary as hundreds of Chelsea fans came out to protest about their club's involvement in the Super League. Those pictures of Petr Cech, amazing, weren't they, as he got off the bus and tried to reason with fans so the bus could get into the stadium so they could play that game against Brighton. Well, the supporters trust here called it the ultimate betrayal. They put out a statement, didn't they, about their chairman Bruce Buck and their chief executive Guy Lawrence should resign. They said their position was untenable, and as yet the club haven't apologised to the fans, and they haven't apologised to Thomas Tuchel either. In fact, he said he hasn't even spoken to the owners, but he doesn't need an apology from them. He was trying to field questions. He said he wanted to move on. He was pretty sick of speaking pre and post match about the same subject. But of course there were questions asked, and I asked him about how they win the trust back of those fans, and this is what he had to say.
It's the owner's club, it's not my club. I'm part of the club, and it was the owner's decision and was a club's decision, and now they changed the decision, and there's no need to apologize to me directly. My job is to adapt to the circumstances, and were we distracted? Yeah, clearly, because otherwise it would not make sense to be focused on games. We did speak since Sunday about nothing else than Super League, but it's already the past, and I'm like I said, I don't think they need to apologize to me. They were absolutely not happy, the fans and the supporters, obviously, but I don't think that it affects in general the opinion on what, for example, our owner did with this club. They were heard in this situation and in this decision. They were heard, but in general, I'm very sure that everybody sees what our owner and clearly the other owners of the big six teams do for this league. I mean, they are a big part of this competition, and this is the competition where everybody in whole Europe envies us to be in it and to have a competition like this.
Well, as you mentioned, Nick, he admitted to being distracted before that game against Brighton. Focus very much on, because tomorrow it's a huge game, isn't it, against West Ham, if Chelsea are to keep up their chances of finishing in the top four in one of those Champions League places.
Gail, thanks very much indeed. Live from Stamford Bridge. Let's talk Kave, if I may. Kave and Brian Swanson still with us. Been a lot of talk about pressure on Bruce Buck, the Chelsea chairman, even though Chelsea seem to be one of the most reluctant of the English clubs to. From Stamford Bridge, let's talk Carve, if I may. Carve and Brian Swanson still with us. There's been a lot of talk about pressure on Bruce Buck, the Chelsea chairman, even though Chelsea seem to be one of the most reluctant of the English clubs to join the ESL.
Yes, I mean, Chelsea were last to board the train, according to what we've been told, in the future. But everything we've heard from Chelsea is that his post at Chelsea is not under threat, and we've been told that nobody will be leaving at Chelsea.
The key point to this, of course, is that, as you've said, Bruce Buck and a number of other top officials, part of 5 of the top, the so-called top 6, are involved in those influential committees within the Premier League. We know that Richard Masters spoke to them individually on Wednesday, and that was the nature of the calls that led to the request for them to step down from those individual committees. Now, people might be asking, what is it that they do in those committees? Well, they are positions of privilege rather than positions of power, because ultimately the power still rests with the collective 20 clubs. But if you're on a key committee, you can help shape the discussion. You can help shape the outcome of that is then put to the clubs. So I think what you're beginning to see here is the impact behind the scenes. There is a big issue of trust. There is a big issue of conflict of interest now. And I think if the Premier League has moved in the way that they have done against those officials, that will be seen by them as a very strong signal of intent that we are taking you out of those committees, we are diminishing your power and responsibility within them, and that is a lesson to be learned from this.
Yeah, so much still to be resolved in this country. Let's look abroad for a moment, because 2 of the Spanish clubs still haven't withdrawn from this breakaway league, Barcelona, Real Madrid. German clubs refused to be part of it from day one. So let's talk to Germany football expert Raphael Hongistein and Spanish football journalist Jurgen Matic. We'll start with Raphael. Schönen guten Abend, good evening to you. How have you viewed what's been going on, this turmoil in England, from the relative peace and calm of German football?
Hi, good evening. I think German football feel that they were on the right side of this divide. They feel that their business model has been validated to a certain extent, because what underlines a lot of the things that happen in Germany is the fear, if you will, that outside investors can come in and then change football and change these clubs in a way that would lose local fans close connection with them, forget their social responsibility, forget their concern with the greater good, and maximize profit and income even more. And of course, that's exactly what's played out. So Germany having very strict regulations of how you can control a club, and it's effectively not possible to buy and sell clubs. There are some negatives to that because it really restricts investment, but this was an occasion where the positives of that very much came into sharp focus. We don't have American owners, we don't have oligarchs, we don't have nation states controlling our clubs, and that isolates us a little bit against some of the more dramatic and perhaps more questionable developments of the last few days.
There's been quite a bit of chat in this country about the German model, as you say, with the exception of, I think, 3 clubs, you have to have 51% fan owned. You know this country very well. Do you think that model could work here?
I think it's very difficult to sort of reverse engineer English football and now give the clubs back into fan ownership. I don't see how that's going to happen. You would have to renationalize, these clubs, effectively take them away from the owners. What you can, though, do, I think, in my view, is ensure that there is fan representation at institutional level. At least having that oversight, having that input, having that degree of transparency that involvement from fans will bring, I think that might help. Because just imagine a fan having been on any of these boards, having understood what was going on, they would have rang the alarm bell, they would have gone public, and maybe they could have prevented and helped their own clubs actually going down a route that was ultimately very damaging to their reputation.
Raphael, I'll come back to you. I just want to talk to you in Madrid. Real Madrid and Barcelona still haven't withdrawn they're there on their own, a Super League without anyone to play against. What's going on? Why have they not withdrawn?
Yeah, as Javier Tebas, the La Liga president, put it, it's now a super duo. Maybe it's just a series between these two that just never ends. But going back to what Rafa said there, it's kind of interesting because when you talk about these two clubs, in Spain, they actually do have a special privilege, Barcelona and Real Madrid. They are member-run, they are fan-owned. They elect a president, the president has to answer to the fans. Atletico Madrid, on the other hand, I think is a separate case. It's maybe a bit more like Chelsea. They do have owners, they were maybe scared of being left out, and they have already uncoupled from this project. Barcelona and Real Madrid are a different kind of case. And I guess what is interesting is that both the presidents have kind of just been elected. Florentino Perez re-elected, and I say re-elected, it was uncontested, but re-elected last week, so he has a term until 2025. The Barcelona elections, we know how long and drawn out they were, but Joan Laporta won, and he has his seat in charge of Barcelona until 2027. So these two presidents in charge of these clubs have their future at those clubs secure for a long time. And I think that's why they could maybe take this risk. Yeah,
their individual future is secure, but the clubs are not secure because they're both in massive financial black holes, and presumably, therefore, they have to carry on, as they see it, finding some way of solving that by Super League or some other method.
Yeah, that's the thing, and it's been very hypocritical, I think, when they say that the idea is to save football. The response in Spain has largely been, well, most of football is doing quite well. Most clubs in La Liga are turning a profit, at least before the pandemic. The clubs that weren't were these two. Real Madrid, to be fair, in a much more healthy financial situation than Barcelona. So the response in Spain has been, I don't know, maybe look at the fingers pointing at you before you point at anybody else, because, as you mentioned, they do have their own issues, and that's surely one of the main motivations, is to save their own situations, maybe not so much saving all of football.
Just in the studio. Rafa, what's the view in Munich and in Dortmund, the two clubs who obviously could have joined the Super League, decided not to? Might they, with some different model in the future, Rafa?
Of the big clubs, and they would be the two big German clubs involved. There were discussions in the past. What they will not agree to, and that's been very clear, is a closed shop, because they understand that that would destroy the Bundesliga as a competition. It is already damaged by the fact that Bayern are very dominant and they will win their 9th title in a row. So anything to undermine the competitiveness of German football on the whole even more, which is where the most of the income comes from, is an absolute no-starter, and that's beside all the wider moral implications of, you know, not wanting to destroy your own competition and your peers. So, as it was, the proposal was never going to fly in Munich and Dortmund, and they're very happy, having been a little bit hesitant, I think, to begin with, to categorically say no, that they eventually came out just in time to be on the right side of this debate.
Very quick one, Rafa, on the expansion of the Champions League, which is happening, more games for all the big clubs. We've had a lot of criticism today, again, in England, of that. How's that going down in Germany?
There's a lot of resistance. People, I think, beginning to understand just what this new model means. Bayern and Dortmund are happy to leave this to UEFA at the moment. They think that the reforms are okay. But if there's appetite for UEFA to push back against the bigger clubs, I don't think they'll stand in their way necessarily.
And a final one to you, Ewan. How do you see this playing out? Are Barcelona, Real, have they got anything up their sleeves in the short term?
Or the Super League has to just disband, because you can't have this two-team Super League. That's just impossible. In the short term, I don't think anything really changes. In La Liga, they never said at any point they wanted to leave La Liga. They'll continue in La Liga. There was a meeting yesterday which they weren't invited to.
Okay.
But in the short term, they'll continue in La Liga, and they'll continue trying to win La Liga over the next few rounds.
Ewan, Rafa, thanks very much indeed. Plenty more to come. We're going to hear from Harry Kane and from Gary Neville. And we're also going to check in with Harry Kane and those protests at Arsenal tonight. We'll be live at the Emirates next.
We're all in to kick it out.
what can I say? They were wrong. These 12 clubs were wrong.
I think it will be a foolish club owner and a foolish UEFA executive who underestimates the power of the people.
It's a mistake. It was a bad idea.
I've been really disappointed by the clubs who got involved in it.
Thankfully, the big six have took a slapping, haven't they?
They'll have to re-earn the respect that they had before.
We're only custodians. To look after the clubs for the supporters.
If they had a Zoom call between the six, I wouldn't have minded being a fly on the wall listening to that one, that's for sure, after the event.
Remain vigilant because I think there's still a movement to do something.
You're watching Sky Sports with a special programme for you, football's civil war, with feelings, as you heard, running deep among the 14 who were left behind in the race to form a new European Super League. And we've learned tonight that collectively the 14 want the removal of the chairman and chief executives of the other 6 clubs. Plenty more to come on that over the next hour and a half. Brian Swanson and Kaveh Solikol on set with me to discuss if the Super League is indeed dead, and if not, what's going to happen next. And we'll have more on the discussion about whether fans' ownership is a model for the future of English football. But next, we're going to hear from the England captain Harry Kane, who has praised fans for protesting against the Super League. Supporters turned up outside the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium before the game in the Premier League against Southampton on Wednesday to voice their objections to the proposals, as well as Chairman Daniel Levy and owners Enoch.
I was surprised, I'll be totally honest. Come in that morning and obviously found out probably 5-10 minutes before it was announced. So yeah, surprised, because obviously a lot of the focus was on the Carabao Cup final and preparing for that. But look, it's football. I've been here now where there's a couple managers been sacked, and I mean, as a player, I don't think you ever expect the boss to be sacked. That's just but it's part of the game. You have to deal with it. You know, I had a great relationship with Jose. I wish him all the best for whatever his next job is. But yeah, he knows, and as we know, football can be a cutthroat game, and we just have to look forward. We've got a big final to prepare for now, and I'm looking forward to that.
And from one North London club to the other, these scenes a few moments ago from the air outside the Emirates Stadium as many Arsenal fans gather to protest against their planned involvement in the ESL ahead of tonight's game in the Premier League, live on Sky against Everton. A lot of fan frustration at Arsenal over the last few days, with some of their representatives talking to Josh Kroenke, son of the owner Stan, yesterday, and making their feelings very clear indeed. Their view is that they don't get English football and should go, and those protests clearly continuing tonight.
It's going to be fascinating to see exactly how they unfold. We've seen lots of protests over the last couple of days on this developing story. But let's get a view now from Italy and speak to Fabrizio Romano over in Milan. Fabrizio, good evening to you.
Hello, big pleasure to be with you. Thanks again.
Yeah, we normally talk transfers with you, but let's talk about the big story in town this week. Juventus chairman Andrea Agnelli has been one of the key figures in these breakaway plans. Alexander Sheffrin called him a snake. How much has his reputation been damaged by the events?
Not so much. It's really a complicated situation here for Andrea Agnelli at Juventus and in Italy in general. Imagine that today there was a meeting between all the 20 Serie A clubs. In this meeting there were also Inter and AC Milan people to talk about what's happened with the Super League. But Andrea Agnelli was the only one who was not present today at the meeting. And also the president of the Serie A, Paolo D'Alpino, was really angry about it. So the situation is getting really complicated. We have rumors about Andrea Agnelli leaving his role at Juventus, but it's complicated because he's not just the president, he's also the owner. The Agnelli family are the owners of Juventus, so that's why the situation is really complicated, and Juventus are denying any rumor about Agnelli leaving the club. But for sure the situation, in particular, as you say, with Alexander Sheffrin, is really complicated, and the reputation of the president of Juventus now is really completely different since what he did with Juventus in the last years.
such a complicated situation, as you say. There's a lot of talk here about the so-called Big Six clubs, about potential punishment. Is there any suggestion the same could happen to the Italian teams who signed up to this?
Yes, in particular with the situation of Juventus, that was discussed, because Inter Milan were the first to leave the Super League. As yesterday, Florentino Perez said, with AC Milan was a bit different, because AC Milan were involved in the process with Juventus. Inter were in a different position because they immediately decided, as the English clubs, to leave the Super League, and they said, we are no longer interested. But AC Milan CEO Ivan Gazidis were really keen on this project, and also, obviously, Juventus president Andrea Agnelli. So that's why we have to see what happens to AC Milan and Juventus right now, but in particular the position of Juventus, because of the relationship between Ceferin, president of UEFA, and Andrea Agnelli is really broken. So AC Milan at the moment are so quiet. Also Paolo Maldini, the sport director of AC Milan, the legend of the club, he said, I apologize to the fans. I was not knowing about this crazy project, so he was not aware of the Super League project, and imagine he was the sport director, and he is the sport director of AC Milan, but another situation for AC Milan seems quiet, for Inter seems quiet, for Juventus seems completely different.
We're seeing the developments tonight involving Arsenal supporters. What have those Juventus fans, just to expand on what you've been saying there, what have they made of what's happened over the last couple of days?
Yes, also before the last match of Juventus against Parma in Serie A, they were totally against the Super League. They were not happy with what the club did. Also, not just because of Juventus, but because of Serie A, what they did with the Serie A TV rights, Juventus, Inter, and AC Milan, all the Italian clubs working with some possibilities, and then deciding to go with the Super League without saying anything to the president of the Serie A and saying what's happened with the other Serie A clubs. So that's why other Italian presidents are really furious with Juventus, with Inter, and with AC Milan. So Juventus fans are totally against the Super League. They are not happy with this decision, but in particular, as you say, with the reputation that Juventus has with the president right now.
And just finally, Fabrizio, again, the Arsenal connection, someone that the supporters know well over at AC Milan, Ivan Gazidis, of course, the former boss at Arsenal. He says that the proposed European Super League will be good for the whole sport. But just to sum up, based on what you're saying, there has been some backlash, hasn't there? What about specifically against him?
Yes, that's because we know what happened with Paolo Maldini. Imagine that he always had some problem with Paolo Maldini in the past. Also, when they were discussing about changing the manager 1 year ago, he wanted Rangnick as manager, and Paolo Maldini was fighting to keep Stefano Pioli. Now with the Super League story was basically the same situation. Paolo Maldini yesterday was saying to Sky Italy that he was not aware of the project of the Super League, and Ivan Gazidis was working directly on the project of Super League. So in the same board, there were some problems, and that's why AC Milan fans are obviously together with Paolo Maldini, the legend of the club, and he's always so clear with the fans. So that's why they're not happy with what happened with Ivan Gazidis. But for sure, what he's saying is that Super League could be positive in one way for AC Milan and for Italian clubs too, but for sure with a meritocratic and something different from what they showed in the last Super League statement.
Thanks, Fabrizio. Appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just want to keep you in touch with what's going on at the Emirates this evening ahead of the Arsenal game against Everton that kicks off at 8 o'clock. Fans gathering ahead of the match to make their feelings very clear against the owner, Stan Kroenke, of whom we see very little indeed. Yesterday, the manager, Mikel Arteta, confirmed he had received an apology from the board. But director Josh Kroenke, as I was saying a short time ago, did face difficult questions at yesterday's fans forum. A protest was planned by the fans for this evening, Arsenal's first game since the breakaway league was announced, and then ultimately collapsing.
We need to put a stop to it now. Come on. We want Kroenke out. Say we want Kroenke out. We want Kroenke out. Say we want Kroenke out. We want Kroenke out. Say we want Kroenke out.
Okay, let's move on from Arsenal for a moment. I want to talk about the future and a lot of faith being put in the what's called the fan-led review, which Tracy Crouch, former sports minister, is going to be leading. What would it mean? How will it happen? And should we have any faith that it's going to change anything? Because so many times over the years we've seen things like this lead to not very much.
I was going to say, I think what we've all got to be wary of is review fatigue here, because it feels like whenever there is a significant moment in time, there's then a review and then it just kind of goes back down to normal. But you do get a sense that this is going to be different. And what Tracy Crouch is going to have to do is she's got that full mandate from government to push on, to gather her thoughts, to gather the evidence, to speak to all the key figures in the game. And this perhaps is the jolt that the government has needed to try to bring about meaningful change here. In terms of the end results, we don't yet know. What we do know is that the Premier League is also holding a strategic review at the moment, and we're told that is in the end stages of that. So what I think football would like to see is a joined-up approach to this. They want to see the Football Association in line with the Premier League, in line with the government, and whatever's feeding into Tracy Crouch's review. She has indicated, and I'm sure the Football Association will indicate, that they fully support what each other is doing. But I think the time has come for less talk, more action. And in terms of the specifics, we just need to wait a little bit longer. I think what has been incredible with this story is the speed and the pace that it has moved. It just shows you, doesn't it, that when football and governments come together, they can stop and they can bring seismic change when they want to. But yes, the challenge that Tracy Crouch is going to have is ultimately bring forward a series of recommendations that then still need to be embraced by the game, and it still need to be adopted by the game. And that's where, and I know Calvi and I have been speaking about this before.
And are we talking, we're talking what, not weeks presumably, but hopefully not years, so months?
Yeah, that would be the expectation, yeah. I mean, I've not seen a specific time frame on this. In fact, I think it's specifically not got a time frame. But clearly, what one figure in the game said to me earlier was that they want to see the momentum now. They want to see what's happened, to utilise that momentum and really push on with this and actually do something about it to make sure. The legislation is key to this. Legislation is key because that's ultimately what will govern. Where they've got slight navigational issues here is the FIFA statutes, because you're not allowed political intervention in the game, and that is something that everyone has got to try and unpick.
I get exactly what you're saying about the fact that we've been here before. You know, over the past 20 years, there have been so many inquiries and reviews, and reports have been produced and recommendations have been made, and nothing has changed. I think what is significant this time is that the Conservative government are taking such an interest in football. In the past, when you thought about Conservatives, you'd think they'd be interested in hunting and shooting and horse racing, maybe. You wouldn't think.
Well, they've got a load of MPs in seats that have been Labour MPs for years in the so-called Red Wall seats.
Exactly.
And the perception is in Downing Street that those voters are football fans.
Exactly. Right? When I was younger, and when I was a football fan, we used to regard the Conservative Party as the enemy of football. I remember they were trying to introduce ID cards for all football fans. But now we've had the extraordinary situation where representatives, fan representatives from these clubs have been invited into number 10 Downing Street to meet Boris Johnson. So you would have to think, you would have to hope that this time it could be different. And it was really interesting listening to Raphael Hongistein. He made a great point that when he said that at the very least we need to have fan representation on the boards, because if you had a fan on the board, then they would have said, hold on a second, what are you doing? Wait, this needs to be thought through. You need to consult with the fans. This would never have happened if we'd had fans on the board of these 6 clubs.
And that supporter involvement is key. Just going back through what the government announced late last night, ownership and directors test criteria to be examined, football governance, finance, and the fan, what they call the fan experience, is to be reviewed. Fans to be placed at the heart of process with different ownership models looked at. Looks good on paper. Ultimately, though, we've got to wait to see what Tracy Crouch comes up with and whether what she suggests and recommends will actually happen.
One sentence, are the football clubs you've been talking to today, the 14, are they up for this? Are they up for this review making a difference, or are they cynical?
Well, I think they would be up for it, as long as if it ended up reining in the power of the Big 6, they would definitely be up for it.
Within reason, I think.
All right, back to you shortly. Let's go to Manchester City now, one of the first English clubs to buckle under the pressure of the fans and withdraw from the Super League following Chelsea on Monday evening. Ben Ransom is live for us at the Etihad Stadium. Ben, good evening to you. City aiming to put the events of the past week behind them. They've got a cup final to play on Sunday, but there are an awful lot of bridges for the owners to mend, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, being honest, I'm not sure that we quite yet know what the lasting damage of this decision is going to be. There was a lot of anger among Manchester City fans earlier in the week, particularly those waking up on Monday morning in some disbelief that their club had opted to join this proposed ESL at the time. I spoke to a lot of supporters through the week. They felt that they'd been betrayed in many ways because, let's not forget, since Sheikh Mansour's takeover in 2008, everything has been pretty rosy here at Manchester City in terms of success, in terms of the ethos of the club, in terms of strategy, in terms of involving the fans. So there was a lot of positives, and all of a sudden that was almost been thrown out. So there was that element to it. I think also City fans were let down by the fact that it took a long time for the club to say anything to them about this. That initial statement didn't really have much from Manchester City in it, and then there was this wall of silence, and the next thing that we heard from the club officially was that short statement on Wednesday saying that they were going to be pulling out. So look, it was a difficult few days for Manchester City fans, and a difficult few days for Pep Guardiola as well, because I think he felt pretty blindsided by what had gone on, and he was really the only one who came out to face questions publicly. I spoke to him on Tuesday ahead of the Aston Villa game, when at the time the Super League was still very much going ahead and Manchester City was still a big part of it, and he was very honest and very forthright as much as he could be, talking about the competition and talking about the fact that because it wasn't competitive, because these teams were guaranteed a place, that for him wasn't what sport was about. And I think those words really did start to resonate with the people at the top, the executives on the board who had ultimately made the decision to go in rather than stay out, because that was the tricky balance they were trying to navigate. They didn't want to miss out ultimately. That's the way they fell down. They didn't want to miss out on what potentially was going to be the future big competition in global football, really. So Guardiola's been very honest. And what you also get, what's also been very apparent, is that part of the decision to enter the ESL was very much a disappointment, this ongoing disappointment and fractious relationship with UEFA. There's absolutely no love lost between Manchester City and UEFA. That goes back. That's been going on for a number of years, and Pep Guardiola in a number of press conferences this week has spoken about UEFA and spoken about the fact that something's got to give. Today he was talking about the Champions League reforms. We know there are more matches for teams in what's an already packed calendar, and Pep Guardiola suggesting perhaps we might have to extend the number of days in the year, slightly tongue-in-cheek of course, if they're going to fit in all the games in that UEFA want them to play.
The players, yeah, they play because they love to play, but sometimes they injure, they come. The UEFA knows that. Of course they know it. They care? Absolutely not. We didn't have one midweek off. So you cannot training. I'm not manager. I cannot train. I don't train. It's just to handle the team as sharp as possible, as happy as possible, like the guys don't play or not. But try to, to be involved, because I cannot train anything. It's just videos and just, remember what you have to do. We don't have time in the preseason to make a principles. We didn't have one friendly game to preparation, and we start the season. Since then, we didn't have one midweek off. As a manager, yeah, international break, but the players go to national teams to play 3 games in 6, 7, and 10 days. When you go UEFA meeting, we talk about that and say, yes, well done. Yeah, we take note. After that, more games. And after we create a new competition for next season, no, the guys were not in the Champions League and Europa League, maybe we're going to play a new competition. Yes, another one. Okay, let's go.
As far as Manchester City are concerned, I suppose it was a small public relations win in that they were the first club to officially pull out of the ESL. But as far as the fans are concerned, it was put to me very eloquently by someone just a few minutes ago. They certainly have not forgiven the club at this stage, but they have at least accepted the club's apology.
Thank you, Ben. Live from the Etihad tonight. Here is Kaveh Solokol with Brian Swanson still with us. We talked about Real Madrid and Barcelona being a financial black hole. City are absolutely not. So why did they want to join the ESL?
That is a very good question. The last big game I went to last year was at the Bernabeu Stadium. The last big game with fans in the ground. It was absolutely packed. Fantastic Champions League night. Manchester City won that game 2-1. Raheem Sterling, I think, scored the winner. And you looked at that night and you thought Manchester City have really arrived in Europe. They can go to a place like the Bernabeu and beat Real Madrid. Now, we know that Real Madrid have got financial problems. We know Barcelona have got big financial problems. AC Milan, Juventus, Inter Milan, they all have financial problems. Manchester City don't. Why would they want to join a European Super League which would make their rivals almost as rich as they are. Why would they want to give these other clubs a hand up when it comes to trying to sign Haaland this summer? If Real Madrid had banked £300 million from the European Super League, Barcelona had £300 million, AC Milan, Juventus, all these clubs had that money, they could go head-to-head, toe-to-toe with Manchester City to try and buy these players. So I just don't understand why Manchester City wanted to get involved. Obviously, I can understand, because if you were going to have a European Super League, they felt that they may as well.
It's the Chelsea argument, to jump on that train before it goes.
Exactly. I don't think they were one of the ringleaders, because honestly, they don't need the money. But I think they just thought, if it's going to happen, we have to be part of it.
Just picking up on what Ben said, and you've just alluded to there about them being reluctant to go in and quick to come out. Have they had any credit for that with the 14 that you've been talking to today, or do the 14 lump the 6 together and want to hit them with one big stick?
I think the 14 are aware who the ringleaders were, and they know that Manchester City and Chelsea weren't the ringleaders. They're still unhappy with Manchester City and Chelsea executives at those clubs, but they're not regarded as being the ringleaders. Everyone is aware of the fact that City and Chelsea don't need the money. So there is a bit more understanding, a bit more willingness to give them the benefit of the doubt compared to the other clubs, but there is still bad feeling towards them.
And when you look at ringleaders, everyone has accepted, I think, that it was Manchester United and Liverpool at the heart of these proposals. In terms of Manchester City, of course, it will have an impact for Ferran Soriano at executive level at the club. And what he and the club will be attempting to do now is to rebuild those bridges with the Premier League clubs involved, and also with the Premier League, given the fact that Richard Masters had contacted them all before they went public with this and warned them of the very real risk attached to it and the condemnation that would follow. So bridges need to be built there, but from the Premier League, they know collectively, as a unit, as a force, they are stronger as a 20. And the big job that they've got to do now is to get those 6 and those 14 together collectively ahead of a big summer off the pitch.
Brian Covey, thank you very much for the moment. Let's take you back to the Emirates and the scene tonight of more protests in football's civil war against what the Big Six tried to do last weekend, which collapsed so quickly. This number of fans at the Emirates tonight protesting. More on that in a couple of minutes. You're watching a special programme on Sky Sports about the European Super League and its collapse. And tonight, Arsenal fans are gathering at the Emirates Stadium to protest against the actions of their own club's owners. I'll show you some of the shots that we've taken from the air this evening. Fans gathering ahead of the game against Everton to make their feelings very clear against the owner Stan Kroenke in particular. Yesterday, Mikel Arteta, the manager, confirmed that he had received an apology from the board, but director Josh Kroenke faced difficult questions at yesterday's fans forum. One fan saying that the owners just didn't get English football. Protest was planned by the fans for this evening. It's Arsenal's first game since the breakaway league was announced and then ultimately collapsed. Does seem that the crowd is growing in size as we get a little bit closer to kick-off, still well over an hour away. Police presence just in case they are needed.
I'm here because I feel like this is the right time, this is the perfect time right now for us to come out and protest. Because us Arsenal fans, we are the only ones that can save this club.
Kroenke out all the way, ruining our club, ruining our fans. Just get him out, he needs to leave. Sell the club, please, sell the club.
55 people redundant, for what? So you can go make more money with the ESL. They knew what they was doing.
So plenty going on outside. Inside is the Arsenal chief executive, Vinay Venkatesham, who arrived an hour or so ago. He confirmed to that fans forum yesterday that he's telephoned all the other 14 Premier League clubs to apologise for Arsenal's decision to join the Super League. We understand those conversations did not go down too well with the other Premier League chief executives. Kaveh Solakal and Brian Swanson are still with me. Venkatesham is pretty much left in the firing line, isn't he? Because Kroenke's never there and other senior executives have departed in the last 12 months.
We shouldn't be surprised by what we're seeing. This is what happens when you don't involve the fans before a big decision. This is what happens when you don't consult with supporters before entering into an agreement that sees you potentially going up against the Champions League and attempting to dismantle the structure that's in place in English football at the moment. It's all very well senior executives coming out after the event and apologising, and yes, credit should be given where some of those officials have fronted up. But you get a sense, and you've had a sense in the last couple of days, that it has been the wrong people that have been put forward in some clubs here. We've seen managers, we've seen players face questions. Some of them have been clearly uncomfortable answering them because they have had to account for the decisions that were made by their paymasters and the people that pay their wages. It would have been great, would it not, when this was launched back on Sunday night, if all 6 collective owners had come together, gone public, answered questions, fronted it up, seen the reaction for themselves, rather than in most cases hide behind statements and then leave the officials underneath them to go out and answer and go out and face the very hostile opposition that Vinay Venkatesham experienced and other officials have been experiencing in the game. But these scenes shouldn't be surprising anyone. We've seen them at Chelsea, we've seen them at Tottenham, we've seen them at other clubs, we've seen them tonight there at Arsenal. And this is, yes, another wake-up call that if you ignore the supporters at the decision-making process, that is what you're going to see.
They're not here to speak, as you so eloquently point out, but if they were, I guess they'd say we can't involve the supporters in advance of this because it's a sensitive business decision.
Commercially sensitive, that is absolutely. You are right in that sense. Of course, there are certain negotiations that need to be commercially sensitive, but when you are looking at gauging the mood and gauging the reaction, it is surprising that nobody sought any form of opinion prior to this and they just moved on with it. And we've spoken about this before, Kaveh, haven't we, in the last couple of days. That lack of visibility publicly, particularly on Sunday nights, will have led to so many, and did lead to so many unanswered questions.
I think the thing about Vinay Venkatesham is he's the chief executive of Arsenal. I don't think he's on the board of Arsenal. He is kind of being made to be the fall guy for this. I mean, at least give him credit for the fact that he's made these phone calls to the other 14 clubs. He's spoken to the players at Arsenal. He's spoken to the manager. He is trying to make amends.
But he's not getting any credit from the 14, is he?
No, but he's trying to make amends for decisions that were taken above him by people who were not here. Now, he's made these phone calls. These phone calls, I understand, didn't go too well. Some of the other clubs thought that he was making a bad situation worse. One of them gave him a tongue lashing and said Arsenal had behaved absolutely disgracefully. I think the problem in these phone calls has been that instead of these 6 clubs just saying, we are very sorry, we're honestly very sorry, we have been totally wrong, this will never happen again. We've been wrong for a long time threatening this breakaway Super League. They haven't been saying that. What they've been saying is, look, we're sorry for the disruption, we got it wrong this time, but fundamentally, you have to agree, it is quite a good idea to have a Super League of some sort, and it's going to happen. We just didn't execute it very well this time around. But look, let's kiss and make up and still be friends, and it'll be business as usual in a couple of weeks' time. I think that has been the approach, and it is not working up until now.
And it all has an impact on the wider football pyramid, which is why clubs in the EFL outside the Premier League were equally concerned about what had happened, even though there was a financial bonus coming for them, we're told as well. Let's talk to Lincoln's chief executive, Liam Scully. His club going really well in League One. Liam, thanks for joining us tonight. Good evening to you. We began our programme at 5 o'clock by Carve telling us that the 14 Premier League clubs that weren't involved in the Super League want the removal of the chairman and the CEOs of the other 6 clubs who did try and join the ESL. What do you make of that?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of making up to be done. I think football's, really let itself down over the last few days and weeks, and ultimately there's been some, betrayals that have gone on that's going to take a lot to forgive, and building trust with each other is going to take a long, long time. So, yeah, I think it's been a turbulent few days. Thankfully, in some quarters, I think the fan influence has had such a positive impact, but still, there are wider threats to our game. At League One, League Two level, we're still not that keen or warm on UEFA's ideas for the future Champions League and other elements. So, yeah, there's whilst we've staved off one threat, I still think there's many more threats for our game, not so far down the line.
How much store do you set by the fan-led review that Tracy Crouch is going to be in charge of?
Yeah, I think we've got to be really careful here with respect, populism policies and sound bites. In 2011, we heard there was going to be a fan-led review there, and at that time, and let's be honest, there's nothing tangible that's come out since then. I think equally, football in itself, we have a number of problems. This isn't going to be solved by moving one piece of the dial. As soon as you move one element, it does have an impact on other things. And I've heard plenty of talk at the moment about the German model, 50+1, which sounds great. But just to give you a quick example why that might be a problem in the short term, is in League One and League Two and the Championship and throughout, we're not yet sustainable football clubs. So ultimately, at this moment in time, we need a remarkable event, be that a player sale or a cup run, or we need somebody to write us a cheque in order to pay the bills and get through to the end of the year. And, good luck finding 72 owners that would take on the challenge and responsibility of running EFL clubs, but without any influence, power or control. So there's a real kind of dynamic to work through. We're absolutely behind a fan-led review and fan-led influence, but this has got to be all stakeholders, broadcasters in particular, commercial rights holders, fans, owners, chief executives, right across the board. If we are going to have a review, we've got to get right underneath this and get really into the detail. And only through that will we actually make some real change and difference that will serve us in the long term. We're not looking to punt this 3-5 years down the road. This is about locking this in for the future of our game for the next 15, 20 plus years.
You've got fan representatives on your board. Does it work?
It does. I think we've got to be honest and say they have influence, not power. We have 2 fans on the board, and we've had fans on the board at Lincoln City for 20 years, which obviously predates my time. But I think what's really important is that you can create a structure with what's in place. So thankfully for the custodians of Lincoln City Football Club that were here before us, they created a framework and a structure that enabled different ownerships and as people invested into the football club, that we were able to fit and mould that model around.
again, going back to what you have at the moment, we do have singular owners in football clubs, so boards of one or two, and of course to then just go and put fans on the board at that point, it could create an imbalance. So I think whilst we're very proud of the model that works at Lincoln City, we have 2 fans on the board out of 12. So they get 17% of the vote as such. I think that is a Lincoln City solution for a Lincoln City problem, and I wouldn't want to be saying Lincoln City have got it right and it works for all 72 or all 92. I think this is where we've got to get right, really into the detail, and only through getting into the detail, understanding what does it look like at Portsmouth, what does it look like at Rochdale, what does it look like at Liverpool and Manchester United, and throughout that structured dialogue, I think at that point, then we hopefully will be able to find a sensible way through this that ultimately helps all stakeholders and all that are interested in the game. Because let's just be really clear, of course the fans are the absolute focal point of this, but across the 72, without owners, without the broadcasters, without sponsors, we still don't have a game. So that's the situation we're in at the moment.
Liam Scully, Chief Executive at Lincoln, thanks very much for your time.
Just to bring you up to speed now with developments involving the UEFA President Alexander Ceferin. He has just given a telephone interview to the Associated Press, and once again he has warned those clubs that are still intent on being in the Super League to step away now, or they will be banned from the Champions League. Ceferin has said, of course, this will be with reference to Real Madrid, Barcelona, Juventus, AC Milan, who've not technically left the project, that officials could still suffer some consequences, saying it's crystal clear that the clubs will have to decide if they are Super League or they are a European club, saying that if they say that they are a Super League, then they don't play in the Champions League, of course, and if they are ready to do that, they can play in their own competition. On the issue of punishments, what Ceferin has also told AAP is that we agreed today, that was the executive committee meeting that they held that also discussed the host cities for the Euro 2020, saying that we agreed to connect with the football associations and leagues that are concerned. So that will include, of course, the Football Association and the Premier League, saying that we will do that next week, and we'll see. It would be good that we can see what specific leagues can do and what the federations can do and what UEFA can do. So clearly what we're seeing there from UEFA is they want some sort of a joined-up approach when it comes to potential sanctions. Is it enough for the clubs already who have pulled back? Yes, there were strong praise from Ceferin for those English clubs that backed away so quickly, but ultimately he will be acutely aware that people are still talking about potential punishments. But what he has made really clear tonight is that those clubs that are still intent on being part of a Super League will have no place whatsoever in the Champions League or Europa League.
Has it been a good week for Alexander Ceferin? Because a lot of people would bump into him on the street and not know who he was, but he had a pretty good week, hasn't he?
We often talk about winners and losers in football, and I think Alexander Ceferin has had a very good week. He began the week on the front foot, calling officials snakes, liars, language that you would never hear from an official so senior in the game. He's a very experienced criminal lawyer, as he reminds you. 24 years he's been a lawyer, and he said that he had never seen behaviour like it. So he had very strong words to say. He then backed down a little bit, if you remember. There was then the olive branch to those English clubs. He was delighted when that domino effect kicked in on Tuesday night.
I think he's a very impressive character. When he stood to be the UEFA president, I think in 2016, I interviewed him beforehand, and he was an outsider. The reason he was running for it was because a lot of the member associations of UEFA, especially in Eastern Europe, wanted their voices heard. So they got together and voted for him. It was in response to the fact that English voices, French, German, Italian, Spanish voices were getting too loud within UEFA. And what I always like to say, and I get a bit of criticism for this, is I like to stand up for UEFA because they have a very hard job. And sometimes in England, we look at UEFA and just think they're there to serve the interests of English football, when in actual fact they're an association of 55 football associations throughout Europe. So Mr. Ceferin has to represent the interests of Bulgarian football, Romanian football, Polish football, football in Iceland, football in Finland, football in Norway, football in Sweden. Yep. And in all those countries, their teams want to play in the Champions League as well, and their teams want to grow and be bigger. So I think he has been doing a very, very tough job, very, very well. Obviously, last weekend it was the nightmare scenario for him. But within 24, 48 hours, everything has worked out very, very well for him. And the only thing he's lost this week, really, is probably his friendship with the Juventus chairman, Andrea Agnelli.
Indeed. Kavik, thank you. And Brian, with us for the next three-quarters of an hour or so on our special show, where next, with the European Super League done for now, could still be maybe resurrected. And we'll hear in depth from this man.
This is a watershed week. This is the moment where they stirred people up that they should never have stirred up.
I'm in.
I'm in.
I'm in.
We are all in to kick it out.
Partnering to end racism in sport.
Keep in touch with events at the Emirates ahead of tonight's Arsenal game against Everton. Pretty large numbers of fans gathering outside to make their protests clear. You heard some voices at Chelsea saying there were only a dozen or so protesters the other night. Well, there's a great deal more than a dozen, as you can see from our pictures at the Emirates tonight, making their feelings pretty clear. You have some sympathy for the players. Maybe you've got to carry on concentrating on football. In the midst of all this, Thomas Tuchel, the Chelsea manager, said how hard that was for his team in midweek. Amongst those trying to concentrate on the football tonight, the Everton goalkeeper Jordan Pickford.
Jordan, obviously Everton weren't one of the big six, but it has impacted you on match day. You've had to come via a different route and slightly earlier as well.
Yeah, I think we just came in the hidden route, but yeah, for us, I don't think it's impacted us. You know, I think we always come in a little bit early anyway. Just we had to have the meeting here instead of at the hotel, just in case as precaution anything happened. But no, we're all ready. We're all prepared.
You're probably going to focus on the game anyway, but even more so given we are now in the run-in to the end of the season.
Yeah, definitely. You know, Arsenal's a club that's around us at the minute, and every game now till the end of the season is massive for us as players and us as a club. So tonight we need to give it our all to try and get 3 points.
How much is it a case of, look, it's been a good season so far, but we need to finish strong to make it a really good season?
Yeah, definitely. And few bad results there and then, but it's about us performing now in starts tonight against Arsenal.
Jordan Pickford speaking to Sky's Jeff Shreves as part of the team, bringing you that game live on Sky Sports tonight. Also talking about Everton, their chief executive, Professor Denise Barrett-Baxendale, has sent a letter to supporters tonight. Here's what she says. I can assure you that I, along with my fellow directors, will be working closely with colleagues and shareholders at the Premier League to ensure the events of this week are not able to happen again, and that appropriate action is taken, which very much backs up what Kaveh Solhekol has been telling you for the last couple of hours, is the view of the 14 who are not part of the proposed Super League. Tottenham were amongst the 6 who wanted to join the Super League. They haven't yet apologised to their fans for their part in it. Let's go live to the club's training ground and Paul Gilmore. Evening, Paul. Daniel Levy's come under huge pressure from the fans. Is there any indication he wouldn't survive this?
Well, Nick, yes, he has received some criticism for the lack of apology towards Tottenham fans. He did say in their statement that he regrets the anxiety and upset caused by the European Super League proposal, but there was no apology, along with Chelsea as well, and that's what those in particular have received criticism for. We know Tottenham supporters, there were small protests outside the stadium, not on the scale we're seeing at Arsenal this evening, but Tottenham protests happened before the Southampton game. We know the Tottenham Hotspur Supporters Trust are currently in a Zoom meeting to try and establish their position on this, and that could be quite interesting. That could be agenda setting if those Tottenham supporters tonight agree on a stance, and that stance, if it's not too favourable for Daniel Levy and the executive board at Tottenham, well then that could potentially ramp up the pressure some more as well, especially if they decide that they can no longer trust the people that run their football club. So all of those things will come into the mix. For Ryan Mason, for the players, of course, it has been a slightly surreal week in terms of Ryan Mason. You take him, the boyhood Tottenham fan who had his career cut short with that nasty head injury, and now finds himself in the interim boss preparing for a cup final. It's been a whirlwind week off the back of all of that Super League stuff. He had to replace Jose Mourinho, take two training sessions before they beat Southampton, and now has Manchester City in a cup final. He said today the line has now been drawn under the Super League, and that may well be the case from the management and the players' point of view, as we've heard from all of the different player side and manager side from the other clubs, but it may not be the case for the supporters, and that's what we're waiting to find out.
Paul, thanks very much indeed. I guess that it just underlines what an extraordinary week it is that Paul, quite understandably, the very end of that conversation there got to the fact that Tottenham are playing in a cup final on Sunday, because this overshadows everything. There's a lot of the criticism at some of the other clubs focuses on foreign owners. Tottenham don't have a foreign owner. Does it make any difference?
They don't, and I think it's interesting in terms of perspective, because what we've got now and what we've seen in the last couple of days is this wasn't one mistake by one club. This was 12 of Europe's big clubs coming together with an investment bank that was prepared to invest in excess of £3 billion on this project, and collectively they all appear to have spectacularly misjudged the situation and misjudged the moods. We saw JP Morgan earlier saying that they clearly misjudged how this deal would be viewed by the wider football community. And I think what Tottenham fans and other fans in the Premier League clubs involved are asking is why this has been misjudged so badly.
All these clubs hire outside public relations consultants at a great cost.
They've got very good inside public relations
as well. They have, but they spend a fortune on public relations. And
I think what the point you made about Spurs is saying that they don't have a foreign owner. A lot of Spurs supporters would say, well, he may as well be a foreign owner because the person who owns Spurs doesn't live in this country, and he's a tax exile and he doesn't come to very many games. But I think it is quite incredible how quickly things have unravelled at Spurs, because if you go back a couple of years ago, they were beating Ajax dramatically in Amsterdam to get to the Champions League final. Then they had that fantastic occasion of playing in the Champions League final in Madrid, although obviously the result went against them, against Liverpool. And Mauricio Pochettino was, I mean, doing an incredible job there with what he was achieving while the stadium was being rebuilt and he was operating on a budget. And ever since then, we've seen what's happened. Mauricio Pochettino has left. Jose Mourinho has come in. Things haven't worked out. The fans have been unhappy. They've been unhappy with the style of play. The players have been unhappy as well. And now we've had this whole fiasco over the Super League, and we've got the uncertainty surrounding the future of Harry Kane. Everybody before this happened was talking about whether Harry Kane was going to leave Spurs in the summer. Now, I think if I was a Spurs fan, one thing I would be thinking is one of the good things about the Super League collapsing is that Real Madrid, Barcelona, Juventus are not going to have £300 million in their back pocket to come and try and sign Harry Kane this summer. I don't think anybody can afford to sign him. And let's remember, he's never said that he wants to leave.
So with different PR advisors, with different chief execs or not, is this coming back?
So if you look at the other side, what we were hearing in that whirlwind period on Monday was that the clubs were preparing to commit in excess of €10 billion for the wider football pyramids. They were very keen to point out that they believed longer term, as part of the 23-year commitment, this would help the game in the long run. You're never going to stop clubs talking. You're never going to stop clubs from sitting down privately and trying to work out how they can maximise their revenue, make even more money in the future. That will never end. What was the surprise here was A, it was so public, and B, they clearly had committed. We've seen statements since that suggest it's been written by lawyers. They are now trying to untangle this. And what that has surprised many. Of course, will it come back in another guise? Who knows? Clubs will always do what they can to try and maximise their revenue. Let's not forget, they have been hammered by a loss of supporters inside their stadium, behind closed doors in so many games because of the global pandemic. They are facing up to a financial crisis in some quarters, in some clubs, and they have been doing all that they can to try and mitigate that going forward.
You know, the point I would make is that what do you need to set up a European Super League apart from getting the clubs to sign? You need money. And who's going to provide that money? An investment bank. How much money do you need? You need about £5 billion. Now, JP Morgan were willing to provide that, and it has blown up spectacularly in their face. They have released a statement. You don't often see statements like that from JP Morgan.
Took about 4 or 5 days to come out with it.
Exactly. When it finally came out, they said, we've made a mistake, we'll never do this again. Now, if I was somebody who wanted to set up a European Super League in the future, I would be thinking, where am I going to get the money from? Where am I going to find a bank who is going to want to put their name to this after the fiasco we had last time around?
But Cav, they need the money, but they also need the support of the football authorities. Breakaway is a very good headline. It's very, very difficult to enforce if it's going to be an unregulated competition, because without regulation, you don't have a transfer window. There's not a lot you can do.
OK, more from these gentlemen in a couple of minutes. And also coming up, more from the interview I did earlier on today with Pep Guardiola. Going to find out what he thinks about the idea of a salary cap. And also, Gary Neville's been very vocal this week. What do you think now at the end of it? We've talked to him as well.
I'm in.
I'm in.
I'm in. We're all in to kick it out.
Partnering to end racism in sport.
It's a criminal act.
A spit in the face.
It is a nuclear war.
You create a kind of cartel.
Greed. That's the only word.
Do you hope there wouldn't be a Super League?
Didn't change.
Some of the executives are getting cold feet.
I want to apologise.
From Joel Glazer, we are sorry.
This has been a farce.
Supporters will not forgive.
This is dead in the water.
That is the end of it.
Gentlemen, you made a huge mistake.
You're watching football's civil war on Sky Sports. We've been examining the events of a week like no other in football. And the threat of a Super League may have gone away for the moment, but the strength of opposition has not. These are the latest pictures that we have from the Emirates Stadium ahead of Arsenal against Everton, live on Sky Sports tonight. And many fans turning up to make the strength of opposition very clear at their club. Gary Neville has been one of the voices of the week, certainly at the start of the week. You may have seen him on Monday Night Football. He was very emotional, along with Jamie Carragher. What does he think now? I spoke to him just before we came on air, this special programme. I asked him whether the apologies from Joel Glazer and John W. Henry were enough.
An apology is not acceptable in this instance with regards to the 6 clubs, and it can never be accepted. Because last Sunday, what they announced was the attempted murder of English football. They attempted to kill English football forever, and they would have done it if they could. They attempted to take £300 million extra every single year for the next 23 years as a guarantee for a different competition that other clubs couldn't get into. They then wanted to come back into our league, the Premier League, with £300 million extra and expect the league to be as competitive as it has been over the last 20, 30, 40 years. It would have destroyed the ethos of English football. It would have destroyed West Bromwich Albion. It would have destroyed Brighton and Hove Albion. It would have destroyed Everton. It would have destroyed Ajax and Bayern Munich in the German league. What they tried to do was an assault. I called it a criminal act last Sunday. Sorry is not enough, because this is the second time that they've tried to do this. And not just that, we've still got Florentino Perez and Laporte at Barcelona saying that this is just on standby. They're coming back. They're just basically, if you like, grouping back at base to go again. They're not going to stop. And if you think about English football history for the last 150 years, there have been different top sixes throughout different decades. What these 6 clubs have tried to do is freeze time. They've tried to freeze the fact that they are the big 6 forever, which means you take away the ambition of every other single football club in this country to try and get into that top 6. And that is absolutely scandalous. And I am sorry, is not enough. Enough is enough. We have to do something big. We have to mobilise. We have to coordinate. And that can be through campaign. It can be through social media pressure. It can be through fans protesting. All those things are legitimate. But behind the scenes, there is a fan-led review being carried out by the government. There are other bodies that are looking to come together to create what would be long-lasting change, which will protect English football forever. And it's critical that it happens now, because now is the moment, because they're coming back, this lot.
You were talking at the outset about massive fines and points deductions. Do you still think that both of those punishments are appropriate?
Any punishments that can be handed to those 6 clubs in the short term should be given to them. Any punishments that can be given to them legally should be given to them. I'm absolutely certain of that. And I have to say, do I want these 6 clubs in English football? Absolutely. We need them in English football. The Premier League is gone without these 6 clubs, and they know that. It's done. We've lost it. What would be a large part of the history of English football, but they have to be punished in whichever way they can. But the bigger punishment is that they cannot come back with any type of proposal which tries to swing the balance in their favour. And not just that, we have to do the absolute opposite, which is take their power away. We have to make them We have to make them equal with the rest of English football so that there is a fairer distribution of wealth. Fans get looked after better. The EFL becomes more sustainable, which is a job for the EFL clubs as well. That the FA gets supported with money so that there are grassroots football, excellent grassroots football facilities, education and coaching all over this country. There is enough money to go around.
Have the Six had their final bargaining chip taken away? They've played it. This has always been the threat. They've played it, and they still didn't get their league.
Well, I don't believe it is their final bargaining chip because they've come twice. And unfortunately, they've got two clubs over in Spain who are huge clubs, Real Madrid and Barcelona, whose presidents are still saying that this is on standby and it's coming back. You know, these people don't go away. They've got huge egos. They don't like being told no. They don't like being blindsided. And this week, they've misread the power of the people in this country, the power of the fan in this country. But what I also think they've misunderstood is I think what's going to happen in the next 6 to 8 months in respect of the outcomes of different things, because I don't think the fans are going to let this go. I don't think that government and I don't think the leader of the opposition and the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats are going to let this go because they understand the importance of football in this country. And we nearly lost it. We nearly lost football in this country in the way in which we've always known it, which is fair and competitive. And we nearly lost our top 6 clubs from it. How can we be in that position ever again? We can't be in that position ever again. So I don't believe it has gone away. I think these 6 clubs are still there. They'll be sort of, if you like, you know, restocking at base, you know, reassessing their options, looking at what they do next. You know, the Glazer family will still be talking to FSG and Roman Abramovich will still be talking in his representatives to Abu Dhabi, and Abu Dhabi will still be talking to the other clubs in Europe. These talks will still be going on, not to bring them back to the table quickly, but they'll be working out how they can actually manoeuvre again into a position to be able to extract wealth from the game.
So to sum up, and I take the point that it hasn't gone away, will we nonetheless look back on this as a watershed week?
This is a watershed week. This is the moment where they stirred people up that they should never have stirred up. They have, I suppose, alerted everybody to their complete intention. Everybody knew that these owners, to be fair, a lot of these owners, some of these owners wanted money and they wanted to drive as much value out of their clubs as possible. What I never thought they would do was try and create unfair competition and a closed shop and walk away with the crown jewels. Now they've done that. I'm sorry, there is no going back. And, you know, there are a number of people in this country who, to be fair, now are alerted to that, who are not going to let this go. And it'll become a very difficult time for these owners, I suspect, in the next 12 to 18 months.
Well, lots to pick out of that. Brian Carvey, he says this hasn't gone away. They'll be regrouping at the back. Who's going to lead that?
Well, I think we've seen that Florentino Perez at Real Madrid, Barcelona want to go again. But I mean, it was incredible some of the things Gary was saying. The reason we like him so much is he says some of the things that we can't say. But I mean, just to pick out some of the things he said is he said apologies not going to be acceptable. What these 6 clubs did was the attempted murder of English football. What they were trying to do would have ended up destroying all the other clubs like West Brom, Brighton, even clubs like Bayern Munich. And he said, sorry is not enough. And of course, as he mentioned, this is the second time they've tried it. It was only back in October that they tried Project Big Picture. That didn't work. They went away, they licked their wounds, and they've come back with something even bigger and even worse for the future of English football. And what he says there chimes exactly with what I'm hearing from the other 14 clubs. One of the chief executives at one of those clubs said to me, we thought they'd learnt their lesson after Project Big Picture, but they're clearly so arrogant that they've continued to say one thing and do another. That is just another reason why we cannot deal with these people anymore.
Will they ever trust each other? The Premier League, 20 bosses. Dean Smith, Aston Villa said today, rebuilding trust is the key. How do you do that?
Trust is the biggest single issue here. The race is on to tighten the legislation, because I think what some of the clubs were hoping with this was that the competition law might fall in their favour. And I think the authorities here in England went to the government and said, what can you do to try to tighten up the regulation here? And that's what needs to happen to try and legally prevent this from ever taking place, involving the breakup of football. clearly there will be a lot of attention now on punishment. Will there be a points deduction? No, I'd be astonished. Will those Premier League clubs be prevented from entering Europe from next season and beyond? No, I'd be astonished, because they have indicated that they have pulled out of the Super League proposal. But what they need to do is they need to sit down and earn that trust back with the other football officials, the 14 clubs that feel hurt. They feel hurt, wounded. You've got Alexander Ceferin saying that they were saying one thing to him and then acting in another way, and that takes an awful lot of time. If they are to be removed from those committees involving the Premier League, that will be the start. And what the authorities are wrestling with is they don't want to punish the supporters. They don't want to punish the players or the managers by stripping them of points, because ultimately that would impact the wrong people here.
I think what Gary says is we have to stop English football being a free-for-all. It can't be an environment where anything goes, where you can come in, do what you want, buy, sell, make a load of money. We have to have rules and laws, which is why he always talks about an independent regulator. And people are sort of wondering, what is an independent regulator? How would it work? Well, we have an independent regulator in broadcasting called Ofcom. It means that I can't sit here smoking, drinking, swearing. There are a whole set of rules and laws that I have to abide by to be allowed to broadcast on this station. And yet in football, there appears to be no rules, no laws. It's the Wild West. Anybody can do what they want.
You mean in terms of ownership? Because you can't go on a pitch and smoke and swear.
Okay, well, yeah, but in terms of ownership, in terms of people coming in and buying and selling these clubs, and the reason they come and do it here is because they can't do it in their own countries. If you look at American sports, how many regulations are there in American sports about what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do, and buying and selling clubs and sharing revenue and sharing TV broadcast rights? I think he is 100% right when he says that we need an independent regulator, and people shouldn't be scared of it. The only people who should be scared of it are the people who have been abusing their power.
Go on, Brian, quick one.
On a lighter note, we thought that VAR was unpopular and hated. I think we've seen the strong reaction here. And universally, people in the game have been praising Gary Neville and Jamie Carragher this week for their forthright opinions. They have spoken with passion, and that has been acknowledged by senior figures in the game.
Brian, Cave, thank you for now. More from them to come. And also ahead in the final part of our football in crisis special, more from our interview with Pep Guardiola and whether he would ever be willing to coach a team in the European Super League.
It's done. So the chapter is closed. It's over.
I'm in.
I'm in.
I'm in.
We are all in to kick it out.
Partnering to end racism in sport.
here on Sky Sports with a special programme called Football's Civil War, looking at the Super League, which collapsed so quickly. I talked to Pep Guardiola earlier today and asked him about possible reforms like the salary cap.
So the salary cap maybe is good, but in America there are 2 or 3 players that can win, I don't know, a lot of money, and the last 70, 80, 19 players, they play just for few money. And I think that is not good for the stability and the health in the squad, in the team. I'm not agree.
İlkay Gündoğan said last night that there were too many games even with the revamped Champions League. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
How concerned are you about player welfare, players getting exhausted? You must be getting exhausted, aren't you?
They don't. I said many times, the UEFA decide the international rules, the Premier League the same here, and they decide for the business. They don't decide for the wealth for the players or for what is the best for the football in terms of fresh in the legs, in the mind to produce quality. So they want to do more and more and more. And they ask our opinion, we answer what we believe, and after they decide. This question you ask to me, you have to ask to the UEFA or the Premier League.
Pep, you've got experience of the German system where they have that 51% rule, fan ownership for most clubs. Could it work here?
It's not by business. So here is a traditional country. There are 20 teams. In Germany there are 18. So in the way they conduct the clubs is completely different. Here are owners that buy the club, and there is different. So it's a situation of every country decide the way he want to be conducted.
Pep, did you ever consider walking away if the European Super League had gone ahead?
It's done. So the chapter is closed. It's over. So we are going to play 10 more games in the Champions League next season. And we will be there because we won it on the grass.
Pep Guardiola talking to me this afternoon. Let's pick up on what he was saying about too many games, echoing what İlkay Gündoğan said last night, the expansion of the Champions League, which would have made much bigger headlines in any other week. They are still going to be playing more football.
They are, and it was a point that we've spoken about a number of times. When it comes to the proposals for the Champions League, this is something that has taken some time to pull together. It's something that UEFA's executive committee signed off. But it's not over yet. This has been missed, a lot of it. A lot of the noise in recent days, understandably, has been about the Super League. But in terms of that Champions League format, 12 significant words to pull out of UEFA's statements here. The potential adjustments to the format approved could still be made if necessary. So if we look there at the proposals, you've got there 36 clubs qualifying for the expanded 36 team league, all clubs to play against 10 opponents, top 8 seeds and sides in league table qualify for knockout stages, 9th to 24th. The new format takes the Champions League from 125 to 225 matches. And Cavi, that's significant, is it? Because it is a considerable number of increased games.
You know, I find it interesting. I keep hearing managers and players complaining about the Champions League being expanded. But instead of complaining to journalists and broadcasters, what they need to do is they need to sit down and speak and complain to their chief executives and their chairman, because they're the people who have forced UEFA to change the format of the Champions League. They've effectively put a gun to the head of UEFA and said, you either change the Champions League and change it to our liking so there are more games and we make more money, or we go away and we form a Super League. What happened is that UEFA did as they were told, changed the format, and the big clubs went off anyway and tried to form a Super League. Now, if you look at the actual numbers that we're talking about, clubs are going to play in the new Champions League from 2024 a minimum of 10 games instead of 6. Overall, there's going to be 225 games instead of 125, so an extra 100 games overall. To win the trophy, I think at the moment you have to play 13 games to win it. In the future, from 2024, it will be 19 games, so an extra 6 games.
So you get more exhausted players and a bigger gap between the haves and the have-nots.
But the champions, UEFA, didn't want to do this. The reason they're doing it is they're being forced to do it by the big clubs, because the big clubs said, if you don't do this, we will break away and we'll form a new league. And another thing the big club said to them is, they said, we want more places. It can't be right that a club like AC Milan hasn't played in the Champions League for 7 seasons because they'd won it so many times in the past. So UEFA have said, OK, we'll even give you that. We're going to give you an extra 4 places, and they could be based on what you've achieved historically. So we could have the ridiculous situation where we've got 4 clubs going to the Champions League from England, and we could also have, for instance, a Liverpool or a Chelsea or a Manchester United getting one of these extra places, or 2 of these extra places, based on what they've done in the past. I don't see what UEFA could have done more to help these clubs. They are being forced to do all this.
Almost out of time. 30 seconds each. You think about yours, winners and losers of this week?
I think it's been a good week for Gianni Infantino at FIFA, Alexander Ceferin at UEFA. It's been a good week for the 14 clubs. It's been a great week for the fans. We have seen football at its best and worst. At its worst, owners accused of self-serving greed, a disgrace to the game. At its best, we've seen fans united. The supporters have spoken. The collective power has been a real show of force. The Super League in its current form has flopped because of the fans.
Calvin?
I would say, look, we know who all the big losers are. Top of the list, I'd put Mr. Agnelli at Juventus because of the way he has behaved. I would say the big winners, we know who they are, but 2 I will focus on: Bayern Munich and PSG. The way they behaved, they've looked at this, they were invited, they said no, no thanks. And what's ended up happening is they've been proved right, and they've been rewarded because Rummenigge at Bayern Munich now has a place on the UEFA Executive Committee, and Nasser Al-Khelaifi at PSG has become the chairman of the ECA, replacing Mr. Agnelli.
Thank you very much indeed. That has been Football's Civil War. If you're watching on Sky Sports Football, the Women's Football Show is next on Sky Sports Main Event and Premier League. It is Arsenal against Everton. There is football going on. There are protests as well. And here on Sky Sports News, David Garrido and Julian Waters will guide you through that and bring you Harry Kane on the subject of his fitness for the Cup final and Jose Mourinho going.